Welcome into the PFN Bengals podcast. I am Dallas Robinson. He is Jay Morrison. Jay, it's a busy Tuesday today. We're wrapping up March Madness over the weekend. We've got all these NFL rule changes going on. How is everything going for Mr. Jay Morrison on this lovely Tuesday?
It's busy. There's a lot going on. You guys know I love stats. I love spreadsheets. I've been a huge fan of March Madness since I was a kid. I run about 9 different March Madness pools, so I'm trying to get those in order. I run 2 fantasy baseball leagues that drafted over the weekend. I'm trying to get all those rosters plugged into the site. Now we've got rule changes coming down the pipeline, one after another after another. I don't remember a year. There's always rule changes every year, and they come at this time at the owners' meetings, but I don't remember there being this many, and a lot of them are small tweaks. But the big one, obviously, the kickoff. That's going to have an impact on every team, every fan. It's going to be a totally different look. I'm looking forward to see how this plays out. But I just talked to Darren Simmons, the Bengals special teams coordinator, a little bit ago, and he has some ideas, but he's like, we're going to have to figure this out on the fly, and you can't just reconfigure your special teams. You still got to have guys that play first, second, and third down too, and you only draft 48 on game day. So it's going to be really interesting how that one plays out, and then just a myriad of other rule changes. It's gonna be interesting this year. I like most of them.
Yeah, these changes do feel, some of them are smaller, like you said, but the kickoff rule that they're adopting from the XFL, this is like a wholesale change that, the league has not seen a change this big in a long time, really. I think it's kind of difficult to explain what the XFL kickoff looks like on a podcast. I'm sure anyone who's listening here probably knows what it's like, but the kind of cliff notes are that there's not going to be any more fair catches. Any kick that goes into this landing zone in between the goal line and the 20, that's where the kickoff can be returned. All the other players besides the kicker and the returner are stationary until the ball is caught. They're only 5 yards apart. There's going to be way less collisions. There's not going to be as many touchbacks. It's going to bring the kickoff back to the NFL is essentially what they're trying to do. And also avoid injuries, because this is where the most injuries happen in the NFL are on kickoffs. Guys just building up speed and running into each other. That's what they're trying to avoid. But I'm so excited to see how this is going to work for strategy too. What type of are we going to see actual offensive plays being designed, on kickoffs? Because that's essentially what it is. It looks like when you watch the XFL, it looks like a running play. It's blocking. A blocking scheme is essentially set up. I'm beyond excited to see what this looks like. Kind of, there's not going to be no more onside kicks, no more surprise onside kicks. That's kind of the one big takeaway from this, is that now that there's this new kickoff rule, there's no opportunity for a surprise onside kick. How much does that really matter? How much do we actually see that in NFL games? Not that much. And in onside kick, the rate has dipped so low as far as how often those are recovered. But I'm like you, Jay. I cannot wait to see how this kind of goes. We'll see it as early as the preseason, I think, and see how teams kind of react to these changes.
Yeah, and that's one of the things Darren said, is he thinks that they will reassess this after the preseason, and they may make more tweaks to the rule after they see how it plays out. Onside kicks they're not gone, because now you can declare it and do it late in the game. The squib kick is gone. If the ball hits the ground before the 20-yard line, the receiving team gets it at the 40, I believe. It's just like it went out of bounds. So that's out of play. I kind of compare it to, you see this a lot on a 4th and 1 play where everybody's smashed up at the line. And if that back breaks one tackle, he can go the distance. And I think you might see that, because the spacing element is so tight now with the receiving team and the kickoff team are only 5 yards apart, except for the kicker himself. And it's just a massive humanity. And if he breaks one tackle and gets through, I think we might see a record this year for number of kick return touchdowns.
I don't know if this has any direct effect for the Bengals. Is Charlie Jones going to be handling that role? Is Travion Williams going to be handling that role? Would this make the Bengals more likely to go out and try and find a specific returner in the draft? Find a guy who is going to be only doing that type of skill? I don't know. I'm not sure how the Bengals feel about the return men heading into next year, but I think it's going to be very interesting to see how this affects the game and how teams kind of affect their roster building as well. I think some of the other changes we want to talk about, Jay, you wrote about that the coaching challenge system has been changed as well. So in the past, that NFL head coaches would have to get 2 challenges right to get a third challenge. Now coaches get 1 challenge right. Now they get a third challenge on the end. You wrote about Jay about the kind of history of the coaches in their challenging record. Zach Taylor, not great. He's not great at all. He is near the bottom of your list that you wrote about challenges yesterday. So that's another one. We've got these other changes, including the trade deadline was pressed back, pushed back to week 9. It was in week 10. I wrote about this last year. I think this is a good change. I think it'll give teams that are sellers and buyers and a much clearer idea of where they are kind of on the scale heading into the deadline. And then IR designations were also changed. So previously, anybody who was placed on IR on cut down day heading into the regular season could not come back on the roster during the regular season. Now, if you put guys on IR, you're allowed to bring 2 back who went on IR on cut down day. A lot of changes. A lot of these changes I think that we're going to have to get used to. The kickoff rule is the biggest one, obviously, but even these little roster changes, we're going to have to get used to and see how teams adapt into next year.
Yeah, and that IR one might affect the Bengals because they've been really good at claiming guys on waivers after cut down
Yeah.
day the last few years. And now if teams are able to stash a couple guys on IR, you don't have to play the roster gymnastics game, but they're able to sneak a few more guys through. And really, I mean, that we talk so much about it where they have this still big need at a run stopping nose tackle. And I was kind of with not a lot in the draft, not much left in free agency. I was thinking maybe that was the next step is you look at cut down day and maybe try to claim someone off waivers. So maybe now even that becomes less likely. Still a lot to be determined in training camp, but I thought that one was an interesting one. The replay challenge, when I went back and looked, there was only 7 instances last year where a coach went 1-1 on his replay challenges. So it would have only made a difference in 7 games last year where that coach would have got a third one by winning one. So not a big effect, but I still think maybe it leads to more challenges because maybe you take a chance on one that you wouldn't otherwise because even if you lose that one, you can win another one and then get the third.
So the trade deadline moving back, I don't think will affect the Bengals that much. They never do anything around the trade deadline anyway. But there was another trade this past week that I think could have some repercussions for the Bengals. The Chiefs traded their franchise tag player, cornerback L'Jarius Sneed, to the Titans, to Brian Callahan's new team, for a 2025 third-round pick. And they also swapped 7th-round picks, which doesn't really have much value. Sneed also signed a 4-year, $76 million contract with the Titans, $19 million a year. I thought this was a very interesting trade because it's obviously has some effects for the Bengals to see a franchise player being traded for such low value. And I think, our Bengals fans wondering, is this the only package that the Bengals might get for Tee Higgins? I think this does have some effects, but there are differences here between what the Bengals would be looking for. Sneed is older. He's sneaky old. He's only going into his 5th season, but he's already 27 years old. Cornerbacks are much more mercurial than wide receivers. It's just not as valuable as a position. Their play is so up and down that they're not going to go for as much as a kind of standout receiver like Tee Higgins. And the Chiefs also roster building strategy is different than the Bengals. I think that they're looking to spend that cash elsewhere. They have a proven record of developing, drafting these young cornerback prospects. They probably don't feel the need to pay someone like Sneed. I think they were just looking for any deal they could find to try to find a team who would give them an extension. I just don't think that's the case with Tee Higgins and the Bengals. They're not going to settle for a 2025 3rd-round pick for Tee Higgins. I don't think they settle for a 2025 2nd-round pick for Tee Higgins. It's a totally different situation. So I just want to kind of explain that, yes, a franchise tag player was traded for a 2025 third. That doesn't mean that's what the Bengals are going to have to accept for Tee Higgins.
No, I mean, Bengals fans should see this as good news that if the trade market is that low, because trading Tee Higgins would be wrong. Unless it's 2 firsts or something crazy like that.
Yeah,
but he is way more valuable. Tee Higgins for 17 games in 2024 is way more valuable than any maybe draft pick. And I think that this kind of, I don't want to say it seals it because you never say never. I thought it was a long shot that they would trade him to begin with. And now you see this, and you're right. It's a little bit apples and oranges talking cornerbacks and wide receivers, but it's still the wide receiver market's incredible this year in the draft class. I don't see a team stepping up and giving the Bengals any kind of offer they would even consider. And I don't see Tee Higgins being a problem. Probably won't show up for the voluntary stuff, might even sit out part of training camp. But he's going to be there when the season starts. He's already got a great rapport with Joe Burrow. I don't think you're going to see him cause a stink. I think it's going to look a lot like Jonah Williams last year. He's not happy, but he's going to show up. He's going to put his head down. He's going to do his job. maybe have the best year of his career.
I agree. I agree, and I think that could we see a draft day trade? Maybe, but I just don't think it's likely either. I think in a season where you're gunning for the Super Bowl, if the Bengals are going to trade Tee Higgins, I think they'd basically have to get one of those top three receivers, whether it's Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, or Roma Dunze.
Mhm.
They'd have to get a deal where they can get a replacement of that level to come in and immediately step in. That's just not going to happen. There's no way that the Bengals are not going to get a top 10 pick for Tee Higgins. In failing that, I don't think you can give up a talent of his caliber in a season where you're going for it all. So I agree with you. Not that this quote unquote seals the deal, but this is trending in that direction that we should just get used to the idea that Tee Higgins is going to be on this team on the franchise tag, most likely, and that talking about a trade is fun, maybe, and speculative, but the odds of it happening are dwindling by the day, I would say.
Even
Um,
if you got one of those top 3, does that make you
mm,
better in 2024 having that rookie instead of T. Higgins? I don't think so. Yeah, it's better for the long run, but that I mean, you're right. The Bengals view every year the same. They're not going to trade in a future for to go for it in 1 year, but
yeah,
it kind of has the mindset of going for it in 2024. I mean, the window's wide open right now, and there's a lot of questions coming down the road as the contracts get bigger. So
yeah.
I just don't see it happening.
And I thought about that too. It's would you be better with one of those big three receivers? Not necessarily, because I think people overvalue what kind of impact rookies have. Like I really do. Like rookies, if you look at it, just don't make the type of impact in year one that you might think they do. There's a reason that betting odds don't change after the draft, right? For the most part. I do think it's a little different at receiver where you're seeing receivers come into the league now and just dominate from day one. Like you
Jamar.
are seeing this in the Jamar is example number one. So I do think if you were able to get a guy like that and you can maybe pencil him in for something close to Tee Higgins level production, maybe. But again, I just don't see a team that's going to be like, yeah, we'll give you the number 9 pick for Tee
Yeah.
Higgins. I don't think that's going to happen. Let's talk about the draft, Jay. The draft is roughly a month away. I mean, it's coming right up.
Mhm.
Next week, we're planning to have Ian Cummings, who is our top draft analyst here at PFN. He's excellent, outstanding, as good as anybody in the business with this process and looking at prospects. He's planning to come on next week and kind of give a deep dive on all these prospects. Jay, we just want to do more of like a high level overview of what are the positions the Bengals are going to be targeting in this draft, right? I think it's obvious that free agency had some effects on this team, and they papered over a lot of their
Mhm.
needs and filled a lot of their holes to the point where there's maybe not a must-have position in the first round. But I think it's fair to say if you're looking down the spectrum of positions, there's probably only what 3 or 4 positions that the Bengals would even consider in the first round at least. Once you get on that, they're probably looking at best player available. But on at pick 18 or wherever they end up picking in round one, maybe 4 positions that I haven't narrowed down to that they would even consider in the first round. I don't see a lot of wiggle room, I think, at least who they'll be targeting.
Yeah, I've got 4. I did the old Duke Tobin pizza pie. I put a percentage on each one of them, and then I put the field, the other
Okay.
positions at 1%. But at 18, I start offensive tackle, 70% chance. That's the way they go there. I've got defensive tackle at 15%, cornerback 9, wide receiver 5. I know the Brock Bowers fans out there are going to be all up
Yep.
in arms. Just don't see it happening. I keep seeing him show up on mock drafts to the
Yeah.
Bengals. You just don't see it happening. I don't see him lasting until 18, and even if he does, I don't see the Bengals turning that card in. Um, it feel even with the Trent Brown signing, it feels like
Yeah.
tackle has to be the pick there, unless 5 or 6 go off the board before the Bengals pick, and I don't see that happening.
I've got tackle number 1 as well. I've got most of the same order as you. I have offensive tackle number 1, defensive tackle number 2. I actually put wide receiver number 3 and then
Mhm.
cornerback number 4. But I just don't see any other positions going off the board. Would they like to grab a tight end? Sure, but it's Bowers or bust. Would they consider other positions? Maybe, but I just don't. There's not a need at these other positions. Could they draft an interior offensive lineman down the road to replace Ted Karras or Alex Kappa or compete with Cordell Volson? Yes, but I don't think that's going to
Not in the
happen at
first.
18.
No.
No. Could they use an edge defender? Yes. Cameron Sample is going into his final year. Joseph Asai is going into his final year of his contract. Sam Hubbard could be going into his last year of his contract. We don't know what the future is, but they're not going to take that at 18 after taking Miles Murphy last year and giving Hendrickson an extension. So I think we're down to these four positions, and I think you're right to put offensive tackle at number one. We got the Trent Brown contract details this week too, Jay, from Jason over
Mhm.
Fitzgerald over the cap. 1 year, 4.75 million, 2 million guaranteed. Much lower than I thought. I mean, he was coming off a 2 year, $13 million contract with the Patriots. Thought he could get something similar to that. Maybe after we saw Tyron Smith sign for 1 year, 6.5 million with the Jets. Should have seen this coming, I think. But Tyron Smith did get an incentive package that could take him up to $20 million on a 1 year deal with the Jets. So to get Trent Brown for 1 year, less than 5 million, no incentive clauses, no playtime
Mhm.
clauses or anything like that. It's just a basic contract. Kind of shows you that they're counting on him for 1 year. I mean, maybe less, maybe less. Like if they draft a guy at 18, this contract does not say to me Trent Brown is our starting week one right tackle, no matter what. It says Trent Brown is an option to start at week one, and he'd be a good swing tackle if we can find a good offensive tackle, a younger option at 18.
Yeah, I like the signing when it happened, and then when the contract details come out, you like it even more. I mean, uh, you're right. There's no incentives in there, and I mean, his agent Drew Rosenhaus, he knows what the deal is, and we talked about it on
Mhm.
the pod. You can't let that guy out the door. They, I mean, Trent Brown had the leverage, and the Bengals still got a team friendly deal to get a guy they had to have at this point. And there weren't a lot of quality options left at that position, and so
Yeah.
just a really good job by the front office to do this. And he's got $1 million in a game day act or roster bonuses. So
Per game roster bonus. Yeah.
yeah,
Yep.
so if you worry a little bit about his past in New England, and if a
Mhm.
nagging injury becomes, oh, I don't want to play, he's costing himself money if he does that, if he goes on IR with a nagging injury. So just the whole way it's structured, I thought was a really good job by Katie and Duke and getting this thing where the Bengals needed to go. I mean, they still have a lot of money under the cap.
Oh
There's
yeah.
still things they could do, or they can just put it in a shoebox and wait till next year and put it towards Jamar Chase's extension.
Yeah. They still have money. It's just there's no one left to sign, right?
Yes.
There's nobody really out there who I think could really move the needle at this point. If we look at the options at offensive tackle at 18, you know, guys like Joe Alt from Notre Dame, he's the number 4 prospect on the
Mhm.
board, on the PFN board, never gonna happen. Olu Fashanu from Penn State, number 7, unlikely. Talise Fuaga from Oregon State, number 11. I think this is a very deep offensive tackle class, which it works for the Bengals. There are a lot of options they could get in round one, but there are a lot of teams I think ahead of them that could use an offensive tackle too. I think we expect the Titans at number 7 to probably draft an offensive tackle.
Mhm.
They've added pieces about every other position that it's just like a blinking sign of, hey, we're drafting a left tackle at number 7.
Mhm.
Um, the Jets could use a tackle. Las Vegas could use a tackle. The Saints could use a tackle. I've been putting a left tackle to the Saints in every one of my mock drafts. Seattle could use offensive linemen. Jacksonville could use offensive linemen. A lot of teams right above them, I think, that could use an offensive tackle. Don't think that means the Bengals are going to trade up to get the guy they want, because we never ever see that, and I don't think it's wise to make a move up for anything other than a quarterback anyway. But I think if you're looking at the most likely options, it's probably guys like J.C. Latham from Alabama, who's number 15 on our big board, Amarius Mims from Georgia, Tyler Guyton from Oklahoma, Troy Fatanu from Washington. Those guys are all in the 11 through 24 range on our big board. Then you've got Jordan Morgan down a little farther at 41 from Arizona. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 8 guys who are in our top 40 approximately on our PFN big board. It would surprise me if there's not an option the Bengals like in that range. And I think at the end of the day, despite there being some other needs on the board, it would just surprise me if that's not the pick, and if it's not one of those 8 guys that I just listed.
Yeah. So we did a mock draft yesterday. Big news coming, people. At Pro Football Network, we are introducing a game changing element to the mock draft process. It'll be unveiled on Wednesday. We did our trial run yesterday, and I took J.C. Latham at 18. Fuaga maybe falls there.
He
I
could.
believe Mims was gone by the time I picked there, but he would be. I mean, if you're looking at a template with Trent Brown and
Seriously.
Orlando Brown, I mean, get another mountain in there. And
Yeah.
but his lack of snaps in college is a bit of a
Yeah.
concern.
Just 8
I
start
think
only 8 starts his entire career. Yeah.
yeah. I think Latham could come in and, either push Trent Brown to be the starting right tackle or light a fire under Cordell Volson, and maybe he plays guard for a season and then
Exactly.
moves out to be the right tackle. There's just a lot of options there. So I like that pick. Um, the Patriots need a tackle too, but they're picking third, and I just don't see them passing on a quarterback. And then
No.
the Raiders, I mean, you mentioned it. Yes, the Raiders need a quarterback or need a tackle, but they could be in the market to maybe even move up and,
Oh,
and get
sure.
a quarterback. And so I mean, if I was setting a number, I think maybe 3 tackles will be off the board by the time the Bengals pick, but crazier things have happened. It could be only 2, it could be 4,
Yeah.
could be 5, and then you pivot, and then maybe that's where the defensive tackle selection might come in.
Yeah.
Byron
And I
Murphy's
think it's
chief among them.
yeah. I wanna say I think it's a great point what you mentioned about one of these guys potentially playing left guard too. I mean, I think that's a really, really good thought that Cordell Volson is not locked in at left guard. I don't think. I think if one of these first round
Mhm.
prospects come in, Trent Brown shows he's healthy and ready to play right tackle, there's no reason why a JC Latham, a Tyler Guyton, a Troy Fatanu could not at least compete with Cordell Volson at left guard. No reason at all. I think that makes a lot of sense. That's a good shout. Um, Defensive tackle, less options, Jay, in the first round. Far less options. We've only got on the PFN big board really 2 guys, I think. It's Johnny Newton from Illinois, who's number 14 on the big board, Byron Murphy the
Mhm.
second from Texas, who's number 21. I think it could be both of those guys could be in consideration for the Bengals, absolutely, if they're there. Um, I the depth obviously is not there, so I think if they want one of those guys, they're going to have to strike. I still think that offensive tackle is more likely a defensive tackle, but we've seen if you go to over the cap and look at the defensive tackle contracts, almost every guy in the top 10 or 15 was a first round pick. Like if you want to find a truly impactful interior defender, you're probably going to have to find that guy in round 1. You're just not finding that guy later in the draft anymore. As much as interior pressure has gotten so important in the NFL, those guys are just flying off the board. So I think if you want one of these guys, you're going to have to take them in round 1, but I would still put the offensive tackle need above defensive tackle at this point.
Yeah, and the whole wild card in this is Devondre Sweat. I mean,
Yeah,
I don't think he goes in the first round. Crazier things have
I don't think
happened.
so.
I don't know that he falls to the Bengals though in the second round. Could that be a guy that they'd be willing to trade up? If he gets to what 40, 41,
Yeah,
42. I
yeah,
mean, if it gets to a point, would they be willing to trade up and get him? Because he is the premier run stopping guy in this draft. And that doesn't mean that Murphy and Newton can't be good at it. Just like Sheldon Rankin says, he can do both. They all think they can do both,
yeah.
but to get a guy that is really specializes in stopping the run, Sweat would be the man. And I think that they would maybe, I don't know, antsy's the right word, but I think there would be discussions if it's getting closer and closer, and they don't want to take a chance on someone plucking him. They
Mm.
could take the unusual step of trading up. They don't like to do it a lot, but I think that would be a case where maybe it might happen.
It's interesting. I need to look more into Sweat, like how he did as a pass rusher, because I think taking a guy in the second who is primarily going to be a run stopper and trading up for him, I don't know. I think in an NFL that is so based on passing and throwing the ball and moving the ball through the air, I don't know if you want to spend a pick on a nose tackle who his
Mhm.
main goal is going to be stopping the run in 2024. I'm not sure. Now, if he turns into DJ Reader, absolutely. Like that's a win. That's a huge win. If he turns into, just another run clogging body, then you've probably wasted a second round pick on a guy who's not really affecting the game in a way that you want. Byron Murphy, man, if the Bengals want a Geno Atkins, I don't want to say a Geno Atkins clone because man, to put Geno Atkins on anybody's name is really kind of setting the expectations high. But from a size perspective, from a interior pass rush perspective, I think Byron Murphy can stop the run. Actually, I think he's like pretty good. He's got a good low center of gravity. Good throws his mass around, throws his body around. I think against the run, I would like that pick if it came in, and I think that's the kind of upside pick that you need if you're really trying to find this high end 3 technique. I think you would look at Murphy as a guy who maybe not in his rookie year, but like maybe in year 2 would it kind of eclipse Sheldon Rankins is the number 1 3 technique rusher on this team. So I would have no problem if they took Byron Murphy at 18. But I question if he's even going to be there as well, because I think that the need for interior pass rush around the league is just so
Yeah.
great that I think he'll be coveted. Wide
I think it's an
receiver
either
and
or thing
cornerback.
where if
Now
he
these are the other.
is there,
Yeah. No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was gonna say,
Sorry, we've got a little bit
I
of a
think
delay today
I
going
think
on today on our audio today.
yeah. So, but I think it's kind of an either or thing where if Murphy is there, then if he's not there, I mean, it means that the tackles aren't running making a crazy run. I mean, it's not
Sure.
guaranteed, but it just feels like that's the case. The other thing with Sweat, what you mentioned, need to look into him. That will
Yeah.
be a perfect conversation for Ian next week to talk about how he sees him projecting as a pass rusher
Absolutely.
and not just a run plugger.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And there's another guy that I actually took in our mock draft yesterday for a different team, McKinley Jackson from Texas A&M, who's this other kind of big nose tackle run plugger who's in the Sweat mold, who is projected to go a little later. So that's another guy I'd like to ask Ian about and see what kind of pass rush can these big bodies actually add, because I think you want that on top of the run stopping ability. Let's briefly go over wide receiver and cornerback. I think we have to throw these in. Obviously, the Bengals are planning for an eventual Tee Higgins departure. I'd be surprised if they don't take
Yeah.
a wide receiver rounds 1, 2, or I'd say top 3 rounds. I would be surprised if there's not a receiver thrown into the mix at some point. Cornerback, we know the Bengals love to draft their early round cornerbacks. I don't know if it'll be round 1. I think they have a lot of faith in DJ Turner to be that cornerback 2. I think they're excited about what Dax Hill could potentially do. But Jay, you mentioned it a few weeks ago, I think, when we were talking on Slack, that patented round 2 cornerback pick, I think that could be in play. And there are a lot of guys, I think, right in that range, 40 through 60 on our big board, who could potentially be available to the Bengals and could interest them if they want to add one more body to that secondary.
Yeah, so I mentioned the mock that we did yesterday, and I hate it. I hate what I did. I didn't even take a cornerback because it's like it didn't fall early. And it's just, I know they took DJ Ivy in the last year in the 7th round, and they liked the way he was coming on, but it's just, it feels like if you don't get a guy in the 1st or 2nd round, those corners just the mid, late round corners just never really materialize. And it can happen, but I think that's a big hole in that draft where I didn't take one. I took Jalen Polk, the Washington wide receiver, in the 2nd round. So I waited till the 3rd round to get a defensive tackle. So it's just, it's weird how the board plays, who goes off. I do think that cornerback would be in play in the 2nd round again. And then if they don't, maybe they do what I did and not take one at all. I don't know if that would be the
Yeah.
case, but it's hard to. I had the numbers in a previous story. I wish I had here in front of me, but the overwhelming majority of starters at cornerback in the league are 1st or 2nd round picks. You just don't find a lot of those guys later.
Yeah, it's definitely true. And I think you can hope that you can like mold some of those mid-round picks, but if you want to find those truly elite shutdown guys, I think you're finding them at the top of the draft for sure. If you said there's going to be a surprise 1st round pick, it's not one of these 4 positions. And I guess we'll have to throw out tight end. Like, any chance that they target any of these other positions in round 1, I mean, I guess it could be interior offensive line would be the one I'd put like 1% chance, 0.5% chance. Like, if they somehow find an interior off, I don't even know who that guy would be, because there's not a lot of just like total clear cut guards. I guess if you're viewing Graham Barton from Duke as a clear cut guard, even though he played tackle in college, I mean, maybe they'd consider that, but I think we've narrowed it down, Jay, to offensive tackle, defensive tackle, most likely, wide receiver, cornerback, maybe. And then after that, I'd be very surprised if they take any other position at the top of the draft.
I could see edge. I could see them adding some edge help
You
there.
could, okay.
And Jared Verse, particularly from Florida State. Again, I didn't take a edge guy in the entire draft. But it was interesting at the combine when Lou has been so hard on Joseph Osai over the years, and then all of a sudden he's talking glowingly about him. It's like,
yeah, right.
Hey, maybe he's back in the mix. And now you're talking about Murphy, Hubbard, Hendrickson, Osai, Sample. It's like, I mean, yes, you always have to plan for the future, but if a guy like Verse is there, I think he would be
Yeah.
considered, especially if there's a huge run on tackles that takes maybe 4 or 5 of them off of the board before the Bengals pick at 18.
And that's just another one too, like defensive tackle, where you're just not finding those guys in late and late in the draft. You're not finding premier guys. Those guys are round one guys almost exclusively. Um, I'm trying to think what it would. I don't think the Bengals will trade up. I mean, that's just not something they're going to do. I don't think there's anybody on this board who like they're going to be dying to have that they're going to have to field trade up. I do think they could trade down. I really do think that's an option.
Yeah.
I think it'll come down to how this offensive tackle board falls. Obviously, I mean, if it gets to 18 and there are 5 of these 8 guys that we mentioned are still on the board, I think the Bengals could very well trade down because you're looking at some teams below them. I don't think the Rams are taking a tackle. They've got tackles. Pittsburgh could, Miami could, Philadelphia could. So I guess there are some teams here that could take a tackle right after them that they might be worried about getting kind of sniped. Dallas at 24 is definitely in the market for a tackle. So I guess now that I look at the board, that maybe that would be the risk is how much are you willing to drop back? How much? What's the price point where you're saying, hey, we're going to get some extra picks. We're willing to take the risk that maybe a J.C. Latham gets taken in these next few picks. Maybe an Amarius Mims go off the board in these next few picks. But Troy Fatanu is waiting at the other end. But a Tyler Guyton is waiting at the other end. It's going to have to be something to consider on draft night, obviously. But I wouldn't be surprised when the time comes if there are people they like on the board that they move down a few picks. It's a patented Bengals move.
Yeah, I wish I had the trade chart pulled up right now because, 5 spots. What does that get you? How many points is that? Well, I guess that would probably be a 3rd round pick. I don't know.
Depends on what chart you look at. Too. It depends on what charts you're looking at. Yeah. If the Bengals moved from 18 to say 23, that's about 140 points in the Jimmy Johnson chart, which is a late 3rd round pick.
Late 3rd
round pick.
Yeah. So,
yep.
Or maybe it turns into like a 3rd round pick swap where they move up in the 3rd round, something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess you're in that dicey range anyhow, because they talk all the time about how many players actually have a 1st round grade. So
yeah,
if it's 12, like what Frank Pollock said with the line of demarcation, then maybe you are more willing to do it because a guy at 18, a guy at 23, they're the same, and you can pick up an extra. I don't want to say premium pick, but you get a late 3rd round pick. That's a day 2 pick. They've made those work. So I think it's in play in the 1st round. I think it's in play in the 2nd round. The trade back anytime they can move back, if they've got a pod of guys that they'd be happy with any of them, I think they're always interested in that.
Yeah, and those early and mid 2nd round picks are just so valuable, right? I mean, like the contracts are cheap. The players are not that different from the guys who are going mid round 1. I think you can really find value there. So I think you can move back from 18, and maybe we'll have to see how the quarterbacks fall too, right? If a Michael Penix is still available at 18, if a Bo Nix is still available at 18, and I don't even know who it would be. There aren't a ton of teams from the bottom of the draft who are in need of a quarterback, but if the New York Giants want to make a leap all the way back up to the middle of round 1 to try and get an eventual Daniel Jones replacement, if Tampa Bay, they're at 26, they re-signed a Baker Mayfield, but it's not they can get out of that contract in 1 year. Maybe they want to come up for a quarterback of the future. That could be something interesting too. If there are still some of these quarterbacks on the board, the Bengals could use that to their advantage, I think, and maybe trying to entice one of these teams to come up the board for one of those guys. I don't know. I think it'll be interesting. There are so many kind of avenues they could go down here. I think that we've got a month to talk about it. They've got a month to go over it and decide what they want to do. But I think we're kind of settling at the right position here. That offensive tackle is still the primary need, as it was heading into the offseason, right? I mean, not from that capacity. I think not a lot has changed despite what happened in free agency. I think at the end of the day, we're still kind of where we were heading into the offseason.
Yeah, and I mean, it's not just the Bengals. It seems like the entire league is trending that there's always been trades in the 1st round. It seems like the last few years it's just one after another. I mean, there's a ton of movement in that 1st round. So their phones are going to be ringing. Even if they're not dialing out, other people are going to be dialing in, and it's always an option.
Absolutely. Jay, I think that's our episode. Am I forgetting anything before I sign off? It's kind of a weird time in the year. It's like there's not free agency's mostly died down. We're waiting on the draft. There's not a ton of like transactional news going on. It's a weird time in the year, but it's also a great time. We've got all this March Madness stuff going on. We've got all this fun stuff going on. Is there anything that I forgot before we head out for today's episode?
No, I think we've got it covered. I'm excited about opening day. I know here in Cincinnati,
Same.
there's a lot of hopes for the Reds, even though it's been a pretty disastrous spring training. Um,
Yes.
I've been to 25 opening days. It's been a few years since I've been to one. Not going this year either, but it's always been. It was a huge part of my childhood. My dad took me out of
Yeah.
school every year to do it, and it's a really really special day in Cincinnati, and I think everything. Like the Bengals dominate the news cycle even this time of year when they're not playing games, but that's the one day where baseball is king. But
Yes.
we'll still be covering football for you
Oh,
on
yes. Oh,
Thursday.
yes. Absolutely, absolutely. Like I said, check us next week. We'll have Ian Cummings on here to go over this draft
Yeah.
stuff, and please be ready tomorrow. We are going to have a big announcement about our mock draft simulator. It's going to be
Yeah.
very fun. Jay and I had some fun with it yesterday, so watch out for that. Everybody, thanks for listening. Give us a like, give us a subscribe, all the good stuff. We will be back next week talking more draft with you on the PFN Bengals podcast.